Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to this month's edition of Artist Alchemy. Um, what's alchemy anyway? It's that medieval pseudoscience that kind of speaks to the magic that happens, I think, in this case, when artists do their thing and come up with amazing work. Today, we're going to be in conversation with our good friend Marcelo Hernandez Castillo. Marcelo is in honor. He's on with us today in honor of April's National Poetry Month. And so we figured what better way to celebrate than to bring on a poetry world rock star. Hope you don't mind me referring to you in that jargon, Marcelo. Um, Marcelo is a published poet, a memoirist. He's the Yuba-Sutter Poet Laureate. We'll talk about what that means here in a little bit. Translator, opera librettist, and I've listened to some of that music. It's magnificent. Did I miss anything? Oh, yeah. And he's also a candidate for the California Poet Laureate position, which is a huge thing. So just to be in the running, I think is a great honor. So, Marcelo, welcome.
Thank you so much, David. So much of my last year has been taken up, not taken up, I would say, has involved my teaching. So I would add,
Teacher.
teaching right now has really been uh, it's been a lot. So among that, I really like being a teacher, and so I teach at the St. Mary's College MFA program, and
Mm.
I mentor graduate students at a low res MFA program out in Ohio, the Ashland University low res MFA program. So right now, that kind of takes the foreground. That kind of takes like center stage in all of my creative endeavors, lesson planning and working with students more so than anything. So I hope the summer kind of brings some writing time and some
Well,
alone time.
I was going to say, I hope you have time to write. And let me ask you this. I have limited experience, a couple of years as a substitute teacher, but I did do a long term substitute gig at Wheatland High School teaching English classes. And and I know now I don't pretend to be a writer. I mean, I do a weekly column for the paper, but that's the labor of love. But you as a professional writer, does the teaching do you get back, not just financial compensation? Is there something in there for you and your creative process, that teaching world that you're very involved in?
Yeah. I didn't mention this earlier, but thank you also for having me, and for all the work that USATR Arts does. I really appreciate all of it, and to be part of programming and just the arts scene in general. And as you know, like I've done teaching with Jumpstarts here in the community, and so my students, I used to see myself as a writer first, then as a teacher, and I think now that's kind of become a little bit more balanced, where I see myself as a writer who learns from my teaching, and
Yeah.
my
Okay.
teaching is informed by my writing, because I have the luxury of being able to like choose what I teach. And so a lot of what I'm reading now, a lot of what I'm working now, a lot of my interests now, uh, kind of translate directly over to my teaching. And so I'm always telling my students, like, we do traditional creative writing workshops, and at that stage, my students are always wanting to. They always put more importance on receiving feedback from others, but I'm continually telling them about the feedback that they write for others identifies their own strengths and weaknesses better,
Mm.
and they're going to learn more from critiquing other people's work. And so the same thing goes for me. I think in the things that I've decided to teach, I teach what I am interested in, and so it does kind of do a full circle back into my own ideas, because my thought processes continue on after the class ends, because it's something
Mm.
that I'm interested in. It's something that um, that it's not just a job. So
Right.
I have a long commute back from the Bay Area when I teach over there,
Oh, so
and
you're doing
so
in-person classes. It's not
mhm,
all virtual. Oh, fantastic.
yeah, it's in person. So I have my everybody there is great, and I'm really enjoying my students. But on my commute back, um, it's really a good alone time.
Mm,
Driving back through 113 from the Bay to continue thinking about what I'm teaching, not only how if it went well or not, but also just as a writer. Like I'm teaching, I do mini lessons. Like we do workshop and then do mini lessons. So like the last one I taught was a mini lesson on ekphrasis,
oh.
which is writing
Explain
when
that. That's a fairly new term to me. I learned it a couple of years ago, I think from you.
and probably because I'm still interested in it, probably
Yeah.
because I'm still thinking about it, and so ekphrasis is just writing about art, so translating one medium into another. So
Oh,
it could even be like sculpture that interprets a painting. So it's transferring kind of one medium into another. The earliest examples was from the Iliad, uh, of the descriptions of Achilles' shield, and so the descriptions of that art piece, and so like something like that I
mm,
kind of take with me. And though I'm not writing a lot right now, because so much of my time is doing teaching, I'm doing some editing work, which I can't talk about yet because it hasn't been public. But
right.
but
Don't spill the beans. Okay.
yeah, no, we'll make it. Making an announcement, but yeah, it's a reciprocal
Yeah.
reciprocal process.
Well, you mentioned Jumpstarts, and I mean here you are teaching at the graduate level in college, and I get emotional even thinking about it. What you accomplished, and we've reapplied for it's called the Jumpstarts grant. It's for at-risk and also system-engaged youth is the pleasant term for some young folks that might even wind up in juvenile hall for various infractions.
Mhm.
And Jumpstarts grant from the California Arts Council, we've received a couple of times, and we've reapplied, and so hopefully we'll be back in that environment if you can fit it in. But
Yeah.
I talk about you, Marcelo, often as having you think you go in with a bunch of kids that are probably pretty street smart and tough, if you will. Not really, but um, and you make these breakthroughs with them as you once you establish a relationship with them and some of the work that they come back with, it's so revealing and tender. And anyway, talk about that Jumpstarts experience and how do you break through to that? These aren't MFA students that really want the best of the best from you. And this you give it to all of them, I know, but the Jumpstart students particularly just fascinates me how you've been able to make those connections with that
Yeah.
group of people.
Yeah. The more I teach and the longer I teach, the more there's not much difference.
Hmm.
Um, there's not much difference between my graduate students and students that I teach for Jumpstarts. Maturity level, even that.
Hmm. Really?
I feel like kids uh, who I've taught with Jumpstarts have had to grow up really fast, and so their maturity level sometimes is on par with some of the maturity issues that I've seen even with some students. Um, and all I'm looking for is a level of engagement, and so if my students are engaged, then I kind of have done my job. And so I'm kind of always surprised with how much I have to actually like wind back
Hmm.
my rigor, because even my MFA students, for example, like I was teaching, I was just like, going off on a tangent as I always do when I teach. And I was throwing down all of these like technical terms. And one student at the end of the class, like was very honest with which she said, "I don't really understand what you meant by establishing patterns." Can you, and like, and so
Wow.
it's really, I am always kind of having to appreciate the back to basics, and my MFA students, it's a mixed bag, but I am starting sometimes with the same conversations. My lectures that I lesson plans that I write for my MFA students, I use directly in
Wow.
Jumpstarts. There was very little difference. I taught the same some of the same poems. We had some of the same exercises and prompts. The only difference was that the students with Jumpstart had the same. They had the same emotional starting point of knowing how they felt, and the only difference was the language barrier of starting to use language, because that can be very intimidating,
Mm.
especially if it's something that if you have been discouraged from using, or discouraged from like uh, um, if you've been discouraged from uh, uh, expressing yourself in any other way that isn't like validated by your friends or
Yes.
something
Yeah.
like that. But yeah, there's very little. There's very in
Interesting.
terms of like the nuts
Wow.
and bolts. There's very little that I change in my lesson plans. It's
Yeah.
just a little bit more context, but that's kind of the case, and I find that kind of cool.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. I would never have suspected that. I would have assumed a completely different approach, but something about what you've just described in those two worlds, that they're really very similar in that respect. And because the surveys that have come back, the work that the younger students that are either incarcerated or in some of the continuation schools, and the
Mhm.
positive feedback, and just the work itself. I mean, it just speaks volumes to the accomplishments for you as their teacher in that environment. It's just remarkable. Um, so we met a couple of years ago at a reading at the Sutter County Library that our friend James Oxner arranged, and he said, "Yeah, we got this poet that grew up here coming in to do a reading. You want to be part of it? Maybe go buy some of the books. You guys can handle book sales." And I read a little bit about you, and I went, "Okay, that was easy, easy sell." Of course, and I know they're getting ready for the grand reopening of the
Yeah,
Sutter
they are.
County Library. I think it's on the 27th. Look it up.
27th, yeah.
We've got a board meeting that night, but our colleague Shante Arroyo will be there to represent the Yuba Sutter Arts and Culture. But James has been a great friend and ally, and we're so pleased that he had made this introduction. Um, Talk about growing up in Yuba Sutter. I mean, you're at some point fairly early on from here, and I think James and the library were a big part of your upbringing. Just talk about that experience, those early experiences.
Yeah. Um, I've been interested in language all of my life, but I had never used the landscape around me or what was around me directly until I had to leave it, until I had
Mm,
to leave, like for grad school, that I realized that everywhere else in America is just as they have the same size streets, they have the same sized sidewalks, they have the same kind of Walmarts on the outskirt of town. And it made me realize that the places that have like been mythologized, like the Midwest, even when I would like when I started going back out east, like to New York, or the Southwest, that these places that have been mythologized by writers that I admire, um, were just places. They were no different. Um, they were no different. It was just what they made of it. And so it took me leaving the area and I was already an adult by that point because I had never really left the area at all, to realize that there was my own mythology that I could pursue. There was about this area, and so I didn't really consider myself a California
mm,
poet until I left California. And when I went back, when I came back, then it was kind of evident that I was getting from my environment, from the Yuba-Sutter area, material, and it took not just writing my first book, but writing the second book, the memoir, to kind of realize that I could find the same kind of um, uh, energy and like electricity in here that James Wright had about the Ohio River,
Mm.
that um, Frank O'Hara had about like New York City blocks, and so on and so forth. So yeah, after I published my first book and kind of like started touring the country and seeing small towns and seeing big cities and being kind of exposed to all of that, I realized that if I were a poet from Chicago, I would write about Chicago. If
Mm.
I was a poet from Mississippi, I would write about Mississippi. I
Mm.
happen to be a poet from California, Northern California, so um, it's taken more center stage
Mm.
in my work now than it did before.
Well, when did poetry really become a thing in your life? I mean, did you want to be a poet from an early age, or did that come later in high school and college, or how did you find your way to poetry? And of course, I know you're not, as you said, you're also a memoirist, but let's assume poetry is kind of your anchor art, if you will.
Yeah,
When did that take center stage?
yeah, I would always consider myself a poet first, because even in the classes that I teach on memoir, I'm teaching a memoir class right
Oh,
now, and again, all of my lessons on language transfer everything that I know of poetry, because I'm trained in poetry. I went to undergrad for poetry. I went to grad school for poetry, and so I know my way around a poem, and that's all kind of transferred over to my memoir. But at the heart of it, I was always interested in language, um, or not even just language, but like in high school, I just happened to take a photography class,
mm,
and I was really good at it. Um, I Had I not been a poet, I think I would still be interested in creating things. I think I would
sure.
still be interested in looking at my life through sculpture, looking at my life through photography, looking at my life, and it happened to be that it was a formative year in high school that I was introduced to poetry um, through a teacher who has since passed away.
Oh,
Yeah, I found out about that a
mm,
couple years ago, but who had kind of an interest in poetry, and so I think I always think back to that and how formative that was. It just happened to come
yeah.
at a formative moment in my life that I thought that that was the best vehicle that I could use. um
And where'd you go to high school? Was it Yuba City High?
Yuba City, yeah, Yuba City High.
They're tremendous supporters. We just love working with their English department on our various poetry out loud
Mhm.
and scholastic programs, and the art department, of course, is just wonderful. We work with all the high schools. We love Yuba City High, and they're just extra supportive, and we have a great collaboration. So you had that key teacher in high school. It's like, I guess, me and my high school drama teacher and Shakespeare teacher that just opened up worlds for me. So
Yeah.
pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Were there poets back then who were the poets that first grabbed your attention in high school?
This is weird, and it's not necessarily the poets, but it's what I learned about them, because the teacher Larry Bryant, um, he was into like the 50s beatniks,
Okay,
but he just started off teaching us like the late romantic English poets, like Shelley, like Keats,
hmm,
and even like later on, early 20th century, still English poets, very much writing in like the traditional manner.
sure,
But he was teaching us how to scan lines, how to scan prosody and traditional meter, and it just did not make sense to me. Like I could not fathom that on top of somebody thinking about what to write, that they also had to think about fitting
oh
these
yeah,
strict rules. And I would turn to my friend, and because Larry Bryant, the teacher, he was scanning like lines and telling us how to read for the where the emphasis, where the accents were,
sure,
and how to break them up into feet. And so it wasn't necessarily the subject matter or the poet, but it was this moment that clicked, that uh, I realized how to read a line, and I realized how to read a line in a particular way. And I remember very clearly, like, it clicked. And so um, my earliest poets that I read were poets that I had introduced. So it wasn't that I read outside of the class, because I didn't really know
Yeah.
that even poets were still writing.
Sure.
And so it was with like those romantic English poets like Keats and Shelley and Lord Byron, that and then even like in freshman year with like Shakespeare. So it was like a very like traditional kind of
All right.
introduction. And it wasn't until college and then after grad school that I started, um, obviously in grad school, but in college, that I started reading more contemporary work, work by living poets, and started realizing like, oh, poetry is alive and well, and that I can make maybe I didn't think I could make a life out of it, but I knew that I was going to keep doing it, regardless of what my life revolved around.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, later on, I started just really reading a lot of more contemporary poets,
Yeah.
and so there's been poets who kind of have always been central to me. Um, but and that's always changing. Like, I go back to some books that were important to me early, and Louise Glick, the latest Nobel winner,
Yeah.
um, was very important to me early on. And I went back to her work, and I realized, oh, I liked her because I was in this stage of my life,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and I still like her, but it doesn't challenge me in a way that like some newer, more experimental poets. Who are working with like visual language. Like, there's this book that just came out, Yellow Rain, by this poet Maida Vang, who's like doing like collage work and
Wow.
like lists and like some things that I would have never thought of as like possibilities for poetry.
And
And taking
it's not just a gimmick. It supports the work, the message.
yeah. It's very much informed by like official government memos and
Okay.
um, declassified information, and using that as like a framework for her poetic
Ah,
project.
so it really supports the themes. Okay.
Yeah, so I guess the more I work, the more kind of it's been removed from writing my poems at the desk to writing them, to echo the series that I run, writing them from the field. And
Yeah.
so taking more of a real world approach to my poems rather than just being written abstractly from my desk, not in
Well,
the real world.
and in my simple, uninformed approach, I mean, that it reminded me of E. Cummings, one of my early favorites, and the way he just arranged the words on the page sometimes, and stripped
Mm-hmm.
out the grammar and left it up to
Mm-hmm.
you to figure it out, sort of stuff. But this seems like like the, the new a whole new approach to that very simple idea that's become much more complex and
Yeah.
fascinating. I
Yeah,
had no
definitely.
idea that was still a thing. So it is possible to still be original.
Uh,
Yeah. Yes
I
and
think,
no.
yeah,
You're hesitating.
yeah. I think if your starting off point as a poet is to be original, then you've kind of discounted what you can learn from like the past. And if your point is to be original,
Uh,
then maybe you've if your point is to be original, then maybe you're writing poems for the wrong reasons.
oh, fascinating. Okay, good. I like that.
Um, and so more than like original is if they're true to you. Um, one of my mentors said, you know, it's not that a subject it gets tired, that we get tired of writing about it. It's just that the good poets are the ones who can give us a fresh take on those subjects that we already know well. And so writing about migration, how can I look at it in a way that is original? So it's not necessarily the the subject matter, but it's my take on it. So uh, yeah, I don't aim to be original. I just aim to be good.
Yeah, yeah, authentic or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if it happens to be original, fine, but that's not the intent. No, I like that.
Hmm.
Um, Uh, Talk about your published work to date. I know you've got the chapbook Dulce, a book of
Hmm.
poetry, Senzontle. You published Children of the Land, your memoir. You've
Hmm.
worked on opera. You've done lots of translated other works. Just talk about it a little bit.
Um, I think they're like snapshots of my life, like the first my first book of poems in Zontle. This is the same original copy that I have read from since its
Oh,
publishing. So I've kept just one copy that I read from. It's all
of
worn and
course.
torn.
Oh, beautiful.
Um, but yeah, I think they're time markers of who was I at that point, where was I at that point, and uh, the kind of person that I was, the things that I was trying to figure out. There were things that I couldn't say, that I felt like were difficult to say in the book of poems, that I continued those same questions in the memoir. Um, and so right now, I felt like I could be cryptic in Sensontle, in the book of poems, in a way that I don't feel is is possible, at least for me now. What is it?
Mm.
4 years since its publication date, but the publication date came, you know, already after I had been working on it for 10 years. So these
Ah,
poems were began in grad school 10 years ago now. um, yeah, because I started grad school in 2012, 10 years ago, almost to the date. Um, and so it's very much of the moment of where I was at. And so right now, I'm taking more of a real, like I said, more of a real world approach, because I don't want to be misunderstood in a way that I felt like I could be misunderstood
mm.
in the first book of poems. And so my poems now are, what I'm working on right now is a lot more documentary style, deadpan, uh, less embellishment, less flourish, less like flexing of language, and allowing the thing that I have to say to stand on its own, rather than beefing it up with metaphor, rather than like making it more important than it is, with like different devices that I learned. Um, and I think one of my favorite poets, Solmaz Sharif, she just put out a book called Customs. She had this like very very deadpan style poem where she says, something along the lines like, she was with a partner, and the partner said, everything can't be political, and she says, or something about like everything is political, or no, I'll have to read it back, but basically she responds by telling her boyfriend, who says, not everything is political, by saying, I was washing his dishes, I had left the water on. So just in that moment, the fact that she, a woman, was washing his dishes, and she, a woman living at that time living in California, had left the water on,
Ah,
there's all of these issues around the drought, around environmentalism, around gender roles. And so
yes.
um, yeah, rather than like beefing up that moment of trying to explain the gender roles, of trying to explain the dynamics of like water conservation and all of that, she just simply said
It's all there.
the moment, and it's all
Oh,
there.
it's
So
all there. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the dramatic uh
Yeah.
situation,
Tell it.
the situation is what's poetic, not necessarily the
Yeah.
language that you make of it.
Well, I like that. That's yeah. Let the reader kind of fill in the blanks. That's kind of
Hmm.
part of it, isn't it? Yeah. Um, we touched a little bit on the work that you've done with Yuba-Sutter Arts and Culture, particularly with the Jumpstarts grant. And again, fingers crossed, we'll know in a few weeks if we're going to be able to continue the program. But let's talk about some of the other programs you've been involved with. You've worked with us on our Poetry Out Loud and Scholastic Writing Awards as judge, and also as a keynote speaker. For those who may not know, Poetry Out Loud is an annual program started by the National Endowment for the Arts 16 or 17 years ago. It's actually when Dana Gioia, California based poet and former poet laureate of California, actually he was chairman or executive director of the National Endowment for the Arts, poetry guy. He said, let's do a thing every year with high school students where they commit to memorizing poems from a list of 1,000. This isn't creative writing, it's creative recitation.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, we've been doing that here locally for almost since the beginning of the program, thanks to some of our predecessors. But great program, and you've been out and seen these students interpreting poetry. It's a list of a lot of the dead white guys you mentioned are on the list, some of their work, but a lot of contemporary poets
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
Fatima Asghar, is that her name?
Mm-hmm.
One of our favorites. Some of her works there, as well as a lot of other contemporary poets. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah.
why is poetry recitation important, aside from writing poetry? Do you think?
Yeah. Um, so like first of all, I really hope that we're able to come back in person to do like jump starts in person in the classroom, because it is difficult to engage students like through Zoom, and especially something that does like grant them certain credits, whether that's just uh, uh, like credits for like behavioral credits or actual school credits. But it, I so yeah, so just to like contextualize that by saying I'm really looking forward, and I really hope that we can do more of that programming. Um,
And Poetry Out Loud has been virtual the last couple of years too. So
yeah,
video, rather than having a live audience, we kind of throw a big poetry and pizza party at our theaters, and
yeah,
students come out. They're on stage, so they have their moment. But it's just not the same as being alone with somebody videotaping your recitation. We've done it. We've carried on.
yeah,
We've had some great
yeah.
contestants, but I totally agree. We got to get live again. That's so much more dynamic.
It is, and I think it's part of the reason why kind of poetry will never go away, because as long as we keep spoken language, there'll be interesting ways of saying it. I only have one poem memorized by heart, and
Really,
yeah, I
one of
don't
yours
usually
or someone
know
else's?
somebody
Oh,
else's, and somebody else's, and I don't usually memorize my poems. First of all, because I have a terrible, terrible memory.
really? Could have
Um,
fooled me, Marcelo.
I mean, I can reference, like, in conversation, I can reference,
Sure.
you know, uh, a lot of people who have stuck in my mind, but that's just individual references to like something will come up around
Yeah.
like imagery, and so I'll talk about Neruda, or I'll talk about James Wright, or something like that.
Yeah.
But in terms of like recitation, it's real. I think working with Poetry Out Loud kind of reminded me just how sacred recitation is, because I met a I met a poet once who the poems that she kept, like, tucked in a folder for other poets that were just important for her, she rewrote. She retyped into her computer, but didn't like copy paste the text, or didn't like save as a PDF. She rewrote them, and it's kind of the same thing that happens when you translate. You kind of like are able to live inside of the poem in a way that you don't just by reading it, and
Mm.
you're able to live inside like the body of the poem by reciting it, by
Yeah.
speaking it. And so, when I hear a poet read their poem, they always read it in a way that gives me new context for it, that I didn't understand it. So um some of the ways that the poets read just gives it a new life that it doesn't carry on the page. Yeah.
That's a great point. And you're reminding me of some other things. I was that geeky high school kid who, back in the day, our public libraries in Los Angeles, where I grew up, had albums, and there was a whole spoken word section. And this Keidman company, I forget who they're part of now, had this incredible collection of poets reading their work. And so, I remember specifically getting Robert Frost and Sylvia Plath. I still own some of these. Charles Bukowski later on, and these albums, and you hear them reading their work, and it opens a whole world, like you kind of, like you said, living inside it in a different way.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
then students reading work that they didn't necessarily write, but still, it's like, wow, I never thought of it that way. One of the common ones that students will do for Poetry Out Loud, because it's short and they get their credit from their English teacher, of course, is Robert Frost's Fire and Ice. And we had, and I think of the more prurient aspects of that poem, at least in my interpretation. But we had a young woman at Wheatland High School recite it a few years ago, and it was like I never heard it before.
yeah,
Like I had a simple little poem like that, and it was like, wow, that was
yeah,
amazing. Anyway,
yeah,
so to your point.
yeah. And when I heard the poet Robert Hayden, who was a Detroit-based poet, um, wrote in a very traditionalist style at a time when like the Black arts movement was veering away from like tradition and doing their own aesthetic. When I heard him speak for the first time, he had such a baritone voice that I did not think about.
Didn't hear that. Oh,
And I heard his voice and I was like, whoa, it does. You're reintroduced to the poem all
yeah,
over again.
yeah. It's
And
fascinating.
there's moments when I'm at my desk and engage with poems, but like other moments when, for example, I went camping down in Big Sur and I'd never been to Big Sur before. I've heard about it, and I didn't know Big Sur was trees. I thought Big Sur was just like
Right.
the coast, but we were driving, me and my wife and my kid in the back, and I just started reciting the one poem that I know by heart,
Oh,
because it felt right for that moment, and it was really, I think it was really special because um, I didn't have my books, my notebook, my computer to reference that, but it was there in that moment.
what was
And
the poem? I'm assuming it's not Trees by Joyce Kilmer.
no, it's Meditation at Lagunitas by Robert Hass.
Ah, Robert Hass, former U.S. Poet Laureate, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Big time guy.
Uh,
Beautiful.
and and so it's a very long poem, and I was assigned to memorize a poem in undergrad, and I chose that poem.
Oh, wow.
And so that's the one that's kind of always lived inside of me. Um,
Sticks with you, doesn't it?
it does, and the more that every time I think like it's kind of a little meditation. Well, it's titled Meditation at Lagunitas, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's kind of like a little meditation, almost like a prayer.
Ah, beautiful.
Um,
Um, I'm torn between which subject to bring up next. Since we're talking about poems and your poems specifically, did you want to read a poem or two? I mean, no pressure. But is there one that you'd like to share? And we don't have to. We can move right along. We've got plenty of other things to discuss.
yeah, let's do that. Maybe I can
All right.
we can come back to it.
Think about
I
it.
just have to find it because
That's all
I
right.
have to find it real quick. But
Yeah. But let's talk about your monthly program. You've been during COVID. One of the things we started at YubaSutterArts&Culture. We were back in, when was that? 2019. Is that when this mess started?
mhm,
We had a lot of live events planned in our then one theater and one art gallery. Now, of course, we also have the Sutter Theater Center for the Arts and
mhm.
the theater art gallery. So, but back then it was like, okay, COVID, we're going to have to shut down. We don't want to be the source of any spreader events. So we said very quickly, very early on, let's go virtual. And so we began a series of virtual programs that continue to this day on a reduced schedule basis. We were doing some of these things weekly, so now most of them are monthly. So we do Artist Alchemy on a monthly basis. And Marcelo has been running the program hour, Notes from the Field, during this time, and brings on guests from around the country, amazing poets. And I know most recently Mariana
Goy
Gocochea,
Goycochea.
Gocochea, yeah, I can do it if I sound it out. And I'm just fascinated. You bring on these amazing people that you have a conversation with about poetry. They share some of their work. I mean, what's your network? How do you and your poetry world connect with so many poets from so many different communities and walks of life?
Yeah, I mean, I try to stay updated on like who's writing what, where are people publishing. I'm currently right now at work gathering, compiling my the poets that I'm going to be featuring for the Poem a Day
Hmm.
reading series from the Academy of American Poets.
Talk about that. That's a huge honor. Yeah. Because I get the daily poem of the day that they produce, but is that the Society for Poets in the U.S. or the world?
Yeah, that's the Academy, like the Academy of Motion Arts and Pictures is
Yeah.
for the Oscars, and so that's the Academy of American Poets, and they've run this
You'll get
series.
to pick those poems in your
Yeah, every year they select 12 editors, and it's a huge deal.
Yeah.
They have like a couple million people that subscribe to it every day, and you know they're the flagship kind of organization.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of critiques around them, but the main thing is that they're really their program is phenomenal. And so I was just blown away when I got the invitation to be editor for the Poem a Day series. My month will be October of this year, and to
Wonderful.
select 30 poets or 20 poets, because weekends they do poets of the past.
Yes.
So during the week for the month of October, selecting a poet to feature every day, and so my curation around that has really been interesting to really search through all of the people who I admire, all the poets who not only like who I admire, but who they admire. And so like
Mm,
looking back at the citations of like, okay, so this poet likes this poet, likes this poet, likes this
mm,
poet.
mm.
And it's really just about reading widely. There is a renaissance of poetry happening right now, and you know, poems right now are being written that are going to be read for a long time. And so also part of that, going back to the teaching, because I teach, I need to be on the up and up on like who's writing what and all of that. So part of the monthly reading series is kind of it is also for me, because I have these great chats with
Yeah.
poets around things that I'm interested in, their poems that that I admire, and so that's been really fun to kind of have these informal chats, and that's the thing. It's like it's very informal, and so like it's one of the reasons why like I have to double check if the certainty of this, but like, for example, like when Freddie Mercury was working on Bohemian Rhapsody, it was started just like on a, they weren't even recording, it was just like kind of jamming, and it's in like those off moments when people are just not really paying attention to whether this is going to be good or not, and it's just kind of like these informal chats. And I think David Bowie was in the recording studio at that time, and they were just jamming, and somebody said, let's hit record because this sounds really good, and then you get Bohemian Rhapsody. um,
The
and
magic happens. Yeah. Wow.
yeah, in like the most unsuspecting moments.
Mm.
So
Oh, beautiful.
the poets that I brought on, have been poets who I know. um, as a reader, like I read for like slush piles for contests. I'm a judge.
Wow.
I've been a judge for a bunch of poetry and nonfiction contests. So
Mm.
that really lets me know like who's out there in the landscape,
You,
not just who's been published, but who
yeah.
hasn't been published. Because like my last guest, Mariana, doesn't have a book yet. She has
She,
publications out in like individual
yeah. That's what she said in the interview. Yeah.
journals,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that it's knowing how to come up on a poet who who's going to blow up. And so you know
Yeah.
it's
No,
been
fantastic. Those emerging artists. Well,
mhm.
again, thank you for continuing that program and bringing that to our airwaves, so to speak. Is that what you call it? Social
Yeah.
media, YouTube
Hmm.
channel, and Facebook. So,
Hmm.
Um, uh, so just a couple of other things here before we start to wind up. Um, you've talked a little bit, I think, about some of your current projects. Any other things you're working on? You're obviously very busy with teaching, and
Hmm.
so no major
Well, I mean, uh, I was
that you can talk about. I mean, yeah.
I was commissioned by the University of Arizona in conjunction with this project called the Marshall Project,
Hmm.
which is funded by
Oh, endowment. Yeah,
the Carnegie Endowment.
yeah.
So they commissioned me to talk about mass incarceration, and so
Wow.
my duty was to write 15 poem 15 poems or 15 pages of poems,
Hmm.
which is a lot.
Yeah.
And so my current project, I think, was had to do around mass incarceration, but not just that, but where the prisons are located. So some of my recent work has been about Folsom Prison.
Mm.
I have two family members who are there, and so it had to do. I'm into being a California poet. Going back to California poets, I'm into ecology and environmentalism, and so I was thinking of the environmental impacts that the prison has had on
Mm.
the landscape being built into like this
Yeah.
rocky crevice, this rocky hillside, but also the plants that are native that grow wildly outside of the prison, right outside of the prison fence, right outside of the
Mm.
prison walls. And so researching the different kinds of plants that grow there and looking up their medicinal properties,
Wow.
their medicinal curative properties.
Right.
And that took up most of my time last summer, researching that and then writing about that. Um, and so I think that's what I'm continuing. That's what my next book is going to be, kind of about a book on ecology and the plants that grow in the area, because I'm interested in the outdoors and I'm interested in, you know, climate change and uh, how the environment has responded to that.
So
Um,
I've seen some of your posts about some of your outdoor adventures. So that's a very sincere and is a therapeutic project. It sounds like, or these outings that you go on look pretty adventurous. Um, yeah, it's not all just family camping. You do some pretty serious hiking and backpacking.
Yeah, I go out into the backcountry and kind of get away, but it's interesting because I have to plan it ahead of time to make sure I go where there's going to be water, where I can filter
Yeah.
that, and kind of researching. I bring all my food along, but I have to be very. I don't turn my mind off when I'm out there, because if I slip on a rock, I can
Yeah.
break my ankle and then be stuck up there without Wi-Fi or without
No, no,
cell
no, no.
service.
Please don't. Please be careful.
Or if I get bitten by a snake, or bears aren't a thing,
Yeah.
but like, let's say it drops down to below freezing and I don't have the
Oh,
adequate clothes or something, so hypothermia, so I can't like turn off and like use that as a relaxing. It's more of like I'm hyper aware in
yes.
those times. And one of my poems, maybe we can end with one of those poems that I wrote about one of those trips that I took out to the Nevada desert,
Mm.
in which it was so blisteringly cold that like at 1 in the morning, me and my friend had to wake up and build a fire and kind of just
Wow.
like sit around it, because it
Oh,
was I didn't expect the desert to be so cold.
desert can get very cold. Oh, it's brutal.
And yeah, just the wind, and we each had our own tents, and we were considering just like going into
Mm.
one and just huddling up for warmth.
Survival mode, my friend.
But
Yeah.
this is my same friend. He rock climbs, and he got what they call benighted. It's like when you just get stuck out
Yes.
there, and he got benighted on a cliff face, because he was rock climbing. So he had to spend the night up there,
Oh, is he
and
free
so
climb or is he a
he
technical?
does he
Oh
does
my God.
but he also does with ropes and everything. But
Watch
yeah.
all those documentaries. I can't
Oh, I
look
know,
away.
it's
Oh
crazy.
my
It's
gosh.
crazy. It's crazy. But yeah, those outings I go on is not a time to like unplug.
Right.
But it's not a time where like I go in order to write something because I'm not comfortable up there. I don't
Yeah.
have a writing. My hands are cold.
Oh,
And so I can't really bring like work with me.
right.
It's really just I hike all day. I get there. I make my tent, I make my food, and then I'm so tired that I just go to sleep. But it's about like being hyper aware. And then I also take lots of pictures to research the plants that I find along the way.
Ah, wonderful. So
Um,
there's some work. There's a work component.
yeah.
Research, yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, good for you. I enjoy the postings. So, before we get back, and if you do want to read, great. But I want to also just touch on the Undocu Poets.
Hmm.
Talk about that organization. Of course, we're collaborating with you and the Poets team on
Yeah.
some new grant funding. We're kind of
Yeah.
acting as fiscal sponsors. But talk about Undocu Poets.
So it's now 7 years into this organization that I've co-founded and now co-run, in which we just bring awareness and kind of support both financially but also professionally the work of former or current undocumented poets to kind of uh, undocumented writers. Having been formally undocumented myself, um, entering kind of this very privileged landscape of the literary industry and MFA programs and just this other world was very alienating. And so there's a lot of poets whose work intersects with their experiences around immigration, migration, asylum. I think one of the most pressing issues that are going to come up of the 21st century is the refugee crisis. Um, Refugees not just displaced from war, like in Ukraine right now, but
Mm.
also climate change refugees who have been displaced because of drought, because of inhospitable climate conditions in which they can no longer, uh, create live a sustainable life. They can no longer live a life that yeah. And so the work around Undocu Poets right now, we run a yearly fellowship that is opened, uh, and we grant funds for two poets, and we also feature them in different venues, that professional venues, and just kind of create a network. You have these different networks, like organizations like Cantomundo, Kavikanam, and Kundiman, of fellowships for Asian American identifying poets, Black poets, and then Latino poets. And so we're kind of like a network organization. We provide a yearly fellowship. We provide opportunities to just be visible, to be seen,
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
published.
Yeah.
And
Based on
we're
that
work,
shared experience. Yeah, of course.
yeah. And so we're working on a new project, which I can't talk about yet, but
Don't mess
because
it up.
it hasn't been announced, but the work is ongoing. The Every year I am encountering new poets whose work I didn't know before. And so that's also part of that like, being in the know of who's writing what. And it's really humbling to see a young poet from, Oregon, who hasn't published
Mm.
but is writing these poems and just reaches out to us. But we're also advocating at the same time. The the National Book Awards still requires permanent residency or citizenship status. The
Oh,
Pulitzer still
interesting.
does.
Oh,
The Amy Lowell Traveling Fellowship, which
right.
provides grants for one poet for a year to travel the world,
Mm.
um, requires, in her will, Amy Lowell said it must be an American citizen. And so we can't really work around that because it was in her will. And so there's still a lot of work to be done. There's still, and so that's kind of something that I do around my advocacy.
No, did you start the organization while you were at University of Michigan, or was it after that?
It's the conversation started while I was finishing there.
Okay. Your
Um,
MFA program, yeah.
the conversations, yeah, around that, and the uh, the collaborations that I did with two other poets who were at NYU at the time,
Mm.
and that's how we kind of gathered. But the momentum started building up in 2014, 2015, when all of the first book prizes, which had previously been uh, people who weren't permanent residents or citizens were excluded from, and so
Yes.
we built up the momentum and slowly one after another, and then it kind of snowballed after that to major every first book prize in the country now.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thanks for inviting us in and allowing us to help support that work, and we're keeping our
Yeah,
fingers crossed.
so
Well, we don't need to cross them anymore. We know you all got the new grant, so um, that'll be exciting. We'll look forward to great things out of Undocu Poets continuing here. What else, Marcelo? Anything else you wanted to bring up? Your
maybe
life
I
as
could
a
just,
writer?
yeah, I mean, life as a writer is tough. I travel still a lot because reading for my work, and so
You're back on the road, which you weren't for quite a
I
while.
wasn't.
Yeah,
COVID really took a hit. I took a hit on that,
yeah.
but I'm back. I was just in Tucson at the Poetry Center there at the University of Arizona, and I'll be back at a bunch of places. I'll be in Ohio this summer and teaching a lot in like at residencies and workshops, summer workshops. So I'm really excited to pack up my suitcase again. I love traveling. I love meeting new people. I love hotel rooms.
Yeah,
Um,
I know there is a certain odd tranquility about
there
that.
is such an odd tranquility. The sterile, clinical coldness of a hotel room is just something so
Yes,
peaceful.
I know. Wonderful. All right. Well, I think I'll spare us the actor studio questions until next time.
Yeah.
We don't want to overstay our welcome. We try to keep it to an hour, and we've managed to fill that time, I think, with a great conversation. Marcelo, it's always such a pleasure and honor to see you and work with you, and we're very excited. If you haven't, gotten enough of Marcelo today, we know you haven't. Come to our event. April again is National Poetry Month, and this coming Saturday, April 23rd, which also happens to be Shakespeare's birthday, Saturday evening, starting at 6 o'clock, we're hosting a poetry and popcorn event at our Sutter Theater Center for the Arts. Free event. Come in. We've got several great local poets coming in, some at the very beginning of their careers, some more mature and well established. And our keynote speaker and poet will be Marcelo Hernandez Castillo. So come meet Marcelo. We've got some of his books available for purchase if you're so inclined. But come out and have a great evening of poetry this Saturday. It's if you haven't been in the Sutter Theater, it's completely been redone. We'll be in the Black Box Theater up on the big stage, and it's really our first big open. It's not an open mic. This is all a programmed event. But come meet some great local poets and say hi and show your appreciation for spoken word at this level, which is pretty exciting to have this here in Yuba-Sutter. Thanks to our technical support team, our producer, Abby Cecina, Shante Arroyo on the technical direction side, and great captioning as usual. So that's it for this month's Artist Alchemy. Next month, my special guest will be Glenda Nelson, Tribal Chairwoman, and Thomas Lozano, Tribal Council Treasurer from Enterprise Rancheria. It'll be a very exciting conversation. You won't want to miss this chat with a couple of important culture bearers in our community. You can always go to YubaSutterArts&Culture for more information on our live and virtual events. Check out Marcelo's next program coming up in May. All of those are listed along with links. Of course, most of them are just streamed out on Facebook, and they're always available on our YouTube channel. So Marcelo, thanks again. We'll see you Saturday, and thanks everyone for watching and listening.